Arthur Sterling did not just crave order, he required it to breathe. As a man who had built a global logistics empire by the age of 34, his life was a series of perfectly timed gears. His penthouse was a museum of sterile perfection, white marble, right angles, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. Arthur suffered from a severe form of obsessive-compulsive disorder that manifested as a desperate need for absolute purity. If a single item was out of place, his heart would race until the world felt like it was collapsing. He didn't have friends, he had protocols. He didn't have a home, he had a controlled environment. One Tuesday evening, Arthur returned from a high-stakes board meeting 3 hours earlier than usual. His nerves were frayed from the chaotic energy of the city, and he sought the sanctuary of his study, a room where even the pens were aligned by ink level. But as the silent glass doors slid open, his breath hitched. The scent of lavender and something earthy hit him, a foreign intrusion. There, slumped in his bespoke, 5-figure Italian leather armchair, was a woman. She was fast asleep, her head tilted back, a tattered paperback book resting on her lap. Her name was Maya, the night shift cleaner he had never actually met face to face. Arthur stood frozen. To anyone else, it was a tired woman resting. To Arthur, it was a biological contamination of his most sacred space. His skin began to itch, and the familiar panic rose in his throat. He should have fired her instantly. He should have called security. But as he stepped closer to demand she leave, he noticed something that stopped his tirade. Maya's hands were red, raw, and cracked from harsh cleaning chemicals. Her shoes were held together by thin strips of clear tape. She wasn't just sleeping, she looked utterly defeated by exhaustion. In that moment, Arthur didn't see a cleaner, he saw a mirror of a different kind of struggle. Instead of screaming, Arthur sat on the floor across from her, his back against the cold marble, keeping a safe distance. He watched her wake up. When Maya's eyes snapped open and she saw the billionaire mogul staring at her from the floor, she turned pale. She scrambled to her feet, apologizing profusely, her voice trembling as she explained that she had worked 3 shifts in a row and her blood sugar had dropped. She waited for the inevitable, the firing, the blacklisting. But Arthur simply asked, "Why do you work until you collapse?" Maya, realizing she had nothing left to lose, told him the truth. She wasn't working for a career, she was working for a debt. Her younger brother was a prodigy, a violinist who had been accepted into a prestigious conservatory, but their family had been buried under the weight of their mother's medical bills before she passed. Maya had signed her life away to a predatory labor contract company that took 70% of her earnings. She lived in a windowless basement, working 18 hours a day to keep her brother in school. She had no time, no money, and no agency. She was, for all intents and purposes, owned by her circumstances. Arthur listened, his mind racing through the logic of her pain. He realized that while he was a prisoner to his mind, she was a prisoner to the world. He told her to go home. He didn't fire her. The next day, Arthur did something he hadn't done in years, he broke his own routine. He spent the morning not looking at stocks, but at the legalities of the cleaning agency Maya worked for. He found a web of exploitation that disgusted him. He realized that his purity was built on the backs of people who were being treated like disposable tools. A week later, Maya was summoned to Arthur's office. She expected a legal notice or a final paycheck. Instead, she found Arthur standing by the window, his hands behind his back, looking unusually disheveled. He handed her a single manila envelope. Inside were the deeds to her debt. Arthur hadn't just paid it off, he had bought the entire cleaning firm and dissolved the predatory contracts of every worker there. But there was more. He handed her a key, not to a room, but to a small, sunlit studio apartment he owned near the conservatory where her brother studied. "You said you had no freedom," Arthur said, his voice quiet. "I can't fix my own mind, Maya. I might always need my chairs to be straight and my world to be silent. But I can fix the fact that you aren't allowed to sleep." He explained that he was setting up a foundation to provide fair wages and legal protection for domestic workers, and he wanted her to run the outreach program. He wasn't giving her a handout, he was giving her back the time she had lost. He took her freedom away from the people who were stealing it and handed it back to her. The resolution wasn't just for Maya. Having her in his professional life forced Arthur to confront the messiness of humanity. He began to realize that a life without a little contamination from other people's stories was a life that wasn't truly lived. He still struggled with his OCD. Some days were still a battle of counting and cleaning, but he no longer did it in a vacuum. He learned that the greatest disorder wasn't a need for cleanliness, but an indifference to the struggles of those who provide it. The story ends not with a grand party, but with a quiet moment months later. Arthur is in his study. Maya is there, not cleaning, but sitting in the opposite chair, discussing the foundation's budget. There is a coffee cup on the table without a coaster. Arthur looks at the ring of moisture it's leaving on the wood. His heart hammers. His hand twitches. But then he looks at Maya, who is laughing at a joke, and he decides to let the stain stay. He realizes that a house is just a building, but a life is measured by the people you allow to mess it up. The message is clear: true wealth isn't in the perfection of your surroundings, but in the power you have to break the chains of another person's struggle. When you free someone else, you often find the key to your own cage.